So good to have you here. Focus on America, we invite all. You want to talk about inclusion? You want to talk about diversity? Bring one, bring all. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent. We'll even take libertarians, you know? It's everyone needs to hear the truth. So we know that there are many, many options in Huntsville on a weekend, in Madison too, even. And we are privileged to have you come here, one of the most fantastic speakers available in the country, who is speaking truth to your power. I'd like to see a raise of hands for anyone who is new. This is your first time attending a Focus on America meeting. Could you raise your hand? Just show that by raising your hand. Fantastic. Fantastic. We have a slight hazing for you that'll be afterwards. No. As always, we do have restroom facilities here if you need them. You have beverages and snacks back here with Gary Cooper. Gary, raise your hand at the bar back there. Many thanks, as always, to Gary Cooper for the use of his facility here at Black Bass Distillery. Thank you so much. Here at Focus on America, we are very direct in our mission. There is a lot of information out there. There are a lot of sources for data and information. And it is divining and discerning what real truth is. Because deception is everywhere, especially self-deception, right? The thoughts, the conversations you have in your own mind are the most powerful sources of deception out there, right? Because there's no one to challenge them. And we want to be spreading truth, and only truth, right? So that is our purpose here, above all else. That's the overarching theme of Focus on America. We want you to hear the truth. You go investigate for yourself. You'll never hear that other places, right? Could you bow your heads, and we're going to open up with a word of prayer and then the pledge. Heavenly Father, we don't talk at you as if you're up in the clouds somewhere or some foreign body somewhere made of bronze or wood. You are a living God that wants to have a relationship with us, talk with us, walk with us, lead us along this journey. So we bow our hearts and our minds right now before you. Lord, if we don't have the eyes and the ears, the spiritual eyes and ears to hear your truth, we're deaf, mute, and blind. We want to take that journey for the next hour or two. Listen to truth and research it on our own, with you being our guiding hand. We thank you for the opportunity to meet as independent citizens in a free country. We thank you for this country. We thank you for the state in which we live. We pray your blessings. We pray your guidance, your strong hand to teach us what is truth and what is right. In your name we pray, amen. If you stand with me, we have an American flag back here, the back right. Place your right hand over your heart and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. We do have another contingent in Birmingham, Joe Singer House. We want to welcome you guys down there listening and watching. We do have viewers in Mobile. So it is spreading across the state of Alabama. You know the problem with red states? We get comfortable. We get comfortable with our politicians. We get comfortable in a world that is somewhat normal. And we look at San Francisco or New York and go, my God, what is going on there? Thank goodness we don't have it here. And we get in a comfort zone, and we don't enact, right? We aren't engaged. And this is what we need. The word is spreading around Alabama, so thank goodness. Yes, and those who stand for health freedom, thank you. The vision statement of Focus on America, you can read along with me, to promote individual liberty, family values, and the U.S. Constitution by active participation in the political process. Active engagement. That's what this is all about. Not passive sitting by and watching everything happen. Active. our mission statement, to encourage Americans to be informed members of their communities, to develop candidates to restore God-given constitutionally guaranteed liberties, and then replace elected officials who do not represent their constituencies. And my goodness, is that not happening everywhere across the fruited plain? Remember our mantras for this year. Vaccines are not safe and effective. They are, say it with me, dangerous and deadly. Thank you. Good crowd participation this night. Remember, candidates in elections, they are not the free choice of us. They are selected and rigged. It's very interesting. I heard an interview recently where the guy talked about, you know what Republicans have become in America? Controlled opposition. It's interesting to note that Joseph Stalin actually encouraged and funded an opposition party, right? He wanted the illusion of choice. And what we seem to have in America at this point is one machine, one political party, regardless of who you choose, they make the decisions for you. And that the speaker today, Catherine Austin Fitts, is standing against that machine, that which seeks to take away all our control, all our power, the state's powers, which should be over the Fed, right, which should be over the federal government. We need to stand against it from a local and state level. CBDC, we know this by now, right? Central bank digital currency, that is the ultimate goal of power. We think we have the illusion of financial transaction independence here, the freedom to transact on an individually liberty-based level, and we do not. All right, that window is closing, as Catherine will elucidate later. That window is closing upon us. So, cash transactions, we need to keep that above the threshold, right? And I hope that helps. Catherine will make it more clear whether that's really going to be something that helps keep us alive and afloat. But you need to use cash whenever you can. And I know that the proliferation of online transactions is so convenient. It's so easy. You know, the swipe of a card is painless, right? If you've heard Dave Ramsey talk about how painless that is, just swipe a card. Using cash is more vital than you could have ever imagined. Again, that's why we have Catherine Austin Fitts here today to give us more shape and color as to what is really happening in this country and what they are seeking to control, right? That power leverage that they want to have over us. 19 to 20% of all purchases, and we're rapidly approaching below that threshold. So, okay, next slide. Save the date, August 24th. Jeff Childers, right? Right? Okay, good. Yes. Catherine Austin Fitts. Wonderful. Wonderful. We are always looking for more speakers, and if you ever have an inroads or an idea of someone, you know what? That's a perfect dovetail into this. This is not free. What we do behind the scenes, behind the curtain, it is not, there is a cost associated with it, right? And we do not ask up front for donations and things. We want you to be led to give whatever you feel. And if you don't feel led, fine. That's great. You go about your way, and we're all good. But know that there is a cost associated with this. What we prefer to have are volunteers to do legwork for us, whether it's research, right, Rebecca? All the things that are ways you can give your time, we need help in, because there are countless House bills and Senate bills. There's countless legislation that needs to be worked and massaged and reworded and sometimes killed. Rebecca, you want to speak to this? You do have a wireless mic right there. Just press and hold the button down to turn it on, and you're good.
So, I have to give you, how many of you got lots of call to actions last week? I was in Montgomery, and I was telling you what was going on. Okay, let me tell you, your voice was being heard. I had people more than usual hiding from me. So that's always a good thing. So that's how I knew their voicemails are full. So now you're going to have to do this. I even found the person that was over the clerks, and that's how we got her number, so that if their voicemails are full, we call someone else and they report to them. But I have to give kudos to Tiffany Knox. She was taking my calls at midnight. I was saying, Tiffany, I really need a call to action for this. She would come up with a graphic. I would give her the information. She would do it. So, Tiffany, stand up. Let's give her a round of applause. She did an exceptional job. So, SB 72, it has passed through the Senate. It has passed through committee in the House. SB 72, how many of you had ivermectin or something to that effect during COVID? How many of you want to keep that right? How many of you think your physician should be able to treat you? And I didn't even get to add, but okay. So this bill protects that right. So it does not say ivermectin. It does not say hydroxychloroquine. It does not say anything about COVID. It simply states that any physician in the state of Alabama has the right to treat the patient that's in front of them in the way that they see fit for any off-label use of an FDA-approved drug. So there's no fear-mongering. There's the state board can't come against them. Now, you may hear, if you're in Montgomery enough, well, the state board has already said they wouldn't go against them for the use of ivermectin. However, they're not finished yet. There's more things besides COVID, and we want to make sure that our physicians and our patients are protected going forward. What is holding us up from getting this bill through? My best friend, Nathaniel Ledbetter, who is Speaker of the House, and I say that tongue-in-cheek, people. So, he is holding it up. Over here, we've got Joe Lovern. He is on the Rules Committee. So our call to action, and this will come out to you, is to call House Rules Committee Chairman Joe Lovern and Speaker of the House Nathaniel Ledbetter. Their voicemails, once they get a few calls, they're automatically full. So we also have their emails, and we'll send that out to you. So between now and Monday, session starts, we continue on Tuesday. I need this on the special order calendar. We only have 7 days left in the session this year. And I am counting down those days, but goodness, we've got to get this passed. It made it through Health Committee even with Paul Lee, so that tells you we made progress because you guys let your voice be heard. Next. So, Montgomery Report. Now I'm going back over here because I can't see. So, there are bad bills that have passed this year. School choice, gambling, and now the innovation districts that just dropped at spring break. And now they're flying through the legislature with very little opposition from either side. This set of bills is a coordinated effort from both sides of the aisle, and it creates legally exempt and tax-exempt entities and unlimited power to tax the citizens. I was told there was nothing the citizens could do to keep this from passing. Not the first time we've been told that. I encourage you to read SB 219 and companion bills that would build a tax-exempt, quote, farm on 500 acres in Jefferson County. It includes parks, music hall, hotels, sports, and so much more by corporations formed by a new government that's separate from the state, free of taxes, ordinances, laws, and fees, and whose money is paying for this new entity. Raise your hand if you pay taxes in Alabama. It's you. Congratulations. So I would encourage that. Our Montgomery Report, some of the bills we do support. Now, I have to preface this with saying there are a lot of bills that we do support. This is not all-encompassing. There are a lot of bills that we do not support. The other list is not all-encompassing. But what we've had to narrow down is we have 7 days left in session. We have to go with the ones that at least stand a chance at passing instead of going through a whole list of everything that we support. We're going to tell you about companion bills, HB 424 and SB 303. This says the WHO has no jurisdiction or power within the state of Alabama, and anything that they pass will not be upheld in the state of Alabama. HB 111, it defines male and female into law. I was telling my dad about this. He goes, I didn't know we needed a law to do that. So, HB 330, disclosure by higher education to disclose any foreign donations specifically from certain places. And it's passed the House and it's now headed to the Senate. HB 390 is removing the Department of Ag from licensure and regulation of medical cannabis. So we do support that. A few bills we do not support. HB 259 for a post-election audit. It passed the House, is headed to the Senate. HB 237, climate change bill. This allows for leasing of lands to store carbon dioxide. I would suggest you follow Alabama Forest Owners Association for more detail. They've broken this down, and great. It's passed the House, and it's headed to the Senate. We also have a bill. We will have a post-election audit. It is a total waste. It's a red herring.
31 days after the
31 days after, where you can't dispute it. It does not say that it has to be hand counted. It is Alabama's way of saying, oh, we're going to let you pretend you're stupid, and we're going to tell you we did something and drag this red herring and tell you, yes, appease the peasants. Let us eat the crumbs of their GMO food, but that's a different story. So, squirrel. So, we also support, we do support election, you guys know we do. I mean, we sued the state of Alabama, so you know we support it. But this is a way for them to hush us up and say, look, we did something about it. Now they can shut up. It never says it has to be hand counted. So what if they put it back through the same machine? Don't be fooled by the things that appear to give you the golden calf. So we also support SB 246. It isn't on the list, but we'll have a call to action for that. So SB 246, Alabama does have religious exemptions for vaccines for school-age children, none for colleges. We do have one that would protect them from COVID vaccines, but that is it. Otherwise, our healthcare workers, our students can be denied their opportunity to graduate if they do not take all the required vaccines for medical practices. So SB 246 will allow a religious exemption based on a parent statement. All I have to do, I don't know about you, but I don't go to confession with Scott Harris. I don't ask Scott Harris for forgiveness of my sins. Why is he the one that gets to say, or his organization that gets to say, oh, Rebecca, sorry, I deemed your religious exemption, you can't have your religious exemption. It should be, my religious exemption should not be controlled by a government entity. And that's exactly what's happening with the religious exemptions in the state of Alabama. And it's time it comes to an end. And sorry, I can't talk without my hand. So this bill has already made it through the Senate committee. It was voted for unanimously in the Senate. It is waiting committee hearing in the House. We only have 7 days left. We need your help in making sure that this gets voted on in committee and that we get it voted for yes. So go ahead and start calling your Alabama House of Representatives. Tiffany, we sent out a CTA last week about who that was on those rules committee. Joe Lovern and Nathaniel Ledbetter are the two big ones. But that protects her rights. You don't have to go to the health department to get your religious exemption. You don't have to face fear and intimidation. If you don't want it, for whatever reason, you simply write a letter as a parent and you present it to their school board. It also, and they cannot question it. It makes it a law where they cannot question your religious exemption for any reason. It also protects our higher education students. They cannot be denied their education because of a religious exemption for vaccines, and it has to be honored. This is a big one, guys. I had a lot of people argue, say, we already have religious exemptions. Well, we kind of do, controlled by Scott Harris. This is ending. We're going to support SB 246. So, two of our farmers are back. Please stop and talk to them. We have Ernest Roots Farm and Feed the Earth Farms. If you have, they're over here. They have great products for you to take with them. I tried the chicken last month, and it was absolutely amazing. So I had chicken salad, I had bone broth, I had everything that went with it, and it is incredible. So 2 thumbs up.
Raise your hands, guys. Stand up. Stand up, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. Yeah. Awesome.
I can't tell you the importance of supporting local, knowing where your food comes from, and remember, we sent out the little message that said, if you have cash, bring it and pay your local farmer. We don't support big ag, we don't support big pharma. We support the people, and they support us.
You can take that back over there, Rebecca. Turn that off for me, Bob. Thank you so much, guys. Yes. You know, here at Focus on America, we like real introductions. You know, you got stuff on paper, you got bullet points, blah, blah, blah. What is the person really like? Well, if we were to list out the life of Catherine Austin Fitts, we'd be here all day. She has had an unbelievably productive career, and I'm just going to touch on a couple highlights. She can elaborate on what she wishes. But this is Catherine Austin Fitts. She's originally a Philly girl. We won't hold that against her, although being a Jersey guy, I would typically. BA from Penn, an MBA from the Wharton School of Business there. She was managing director of Dillon Reed and Company. Assistant Secretary of HUD, again, some things we won't hold against her, right? But she was, if you're familiar with the savings and loan crises from the 80s and 90s, she basically was called in to do a lot of repair work there, kind of discover that fraud, which she did. It's rampant, right? She was actually, when she left there, she was offered a seat at the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, which she turned down. Which is amazing considering the corruption that goes on there and what she would have had available to her with that position. She founded Hamilton Securities as a brokerage house, employee-owned, by the way. But the heart of it is she is now one of the foremost advocates for financial transaction independence and raising the flag to the American citizenry of what is occurring behind the scenes to remove what we think is our own power and control over our finances, right? And she's going to go into some detail about what is actually occurring in that and many other things. It is my pleasure to introduce to you the unbelievable Catherine Austin Fitts. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, because Gary, wave your hand, Gary. Gary, this is my second time at Black Patch Distillery, and when I left here, I was on the way to Memphis, and I needed a house present. I was staying with a friend of mine in Germantown, who has the best taste ever. She's the ultimate Southern hostess. So I was bemoaning the fact that I needed something, and Margaret told me, I think it was you, Margaret, who told me about the pecan pie liqueur, right? So the first thing I did when I walked in here, because she's already out, she needs a second bottle, is Gary, promise me if I mention this that you won't run out, because I need another bottle. Okay? Okay, so I can't recommend it enough. My favorite story in the Bible is the story of Gideon and the angel of the Lord. And essentially the message from the angel is we only work through people who are faithful and competent. So they need to be faithful, the scared guys need to go home, and they need to be competent. And the message is we don't need a lot of people, but the divine can only work through people who are faithful and competent. And one of the reasons I'm so pleased to be here today is Focus on America and Rebecca are so faithful and competent. I can't tell you what it means to the people of Alabama to have someone like Rebecca in there at the state legislature fighting for your rights, but also letting you know what's going on. Because if people like Rebecca are not there, you can't imagine what would go on. It's just unbelievable. So, Rebecca, I just want to thank you for what you do, and I want another round of applause. So at this... Okay, so at the Solari Report, we publish wrap-ups. I'm going to refer to a lot of our wrap-ups there in hard copy. Here's one of the latest is the future of financial freedom, and I'm going to refer to them during the speech, but we bring them to help raise money for Focus on America. So when we travel, what we try and do is bring the wrap up so that you can raise money for the groups who sponsor the event. So they're going to be, Sarah's going to have copies of these. I'm going to refer to them during the speech. And if you feel led to and you want copies, please make a donation. See Sarah and make a donation in exchange for one. Okay, so I published the Solari Report, and I also have a company called Solari Investment Screens. And I decided, I met with my team late last year, and I said, you know something? We need a jurisdiction where we are free to transact. If you look at what's happening in the world, the central bankers intend to assert complete control of our financial transactions. So think of this as a coup d'etat, very simply, or a financial coup d'etat. But here's the essence of how it works, and I'm going to show you a few videos to make my point. Our way of government, our process of government is we have a monetary power, that's the central bank, the Federal Reserve, and the 12 Federal Reserve banks around the country, and they run monetary policy. Then the people's representatives are voted into the legislature, and they run fiscal policy. And fiscal policy is important because it's financed first with our taxes. Our federal taxes are one of the biggest investments we make, and it's financed with our pension funds. Our pension funds are the biggest buyers of Treasury securities, Treasury bonds, and bills. So whether our pension funds and retirement accounts or our taxes, we're sending in an extraordinary amount of money, and that money is supposed to be, sort of allocated and managed by the legislature according to the law. Now, for the last, since fiscal 1998, federal government has been in massive violation of the laws related to the fiscal side of the house. And I call that the financial coup d'etat. And part of what we're living through now and part of what the pandemic was is part of a reset. Because if you promise people lots of retirement obligations and make other promises to them, but you steal the money, then something's going to give. And of course, as people retire, that's what's happening now. Anyway, so what are the central bankers up to? What they're up to is, has been described by some people as techno-feudalism. An all-digital financial system, and remember that, all digital. What we need to, what you need to have fascism is 100% digital. So what they want is a 100% digital system, both telecommunications, payment systems, financial transactions. So all currency is digital. And through that, they don't need legislators or governments. They can create a social credit system with software and AI and determine and implement all legislative and regulatory rules through a social credit system which is enforced through the money. If you don't obey the rules, so if another pandemic should come and they want everybody locked down, your money won't work, more than 5 miles from your home, or if you're supposed to stay at home, it won't work outside your home, okay? Or if they don't want you buying pizza, you can't buy, your money won't work. So we're talking about complete financial transaction control, and new technology, AI and software makes this possible. Now, lest you think that this is somehow energy efficient or environmentally friendly, this is the most wasteful, expensive system. The control grid is beyond wasteful. There's a wonderful documentary from the Netherlands called State of Control, and if you want to learn more about it, I would strongly recommend you watch that. It's free. It's up on the internet, called State of Control. Okay, so I got together with my team last year, and I said, we need to figure out, I've been networking all over Europe. I live in Europe part of the time, networking all over the United States. We need to find a jurisdiction that is going to protect our financial transaction freedom, because if we don't have that individually or as a business, we're toast. And you notice, we're watching more and more dirty tricks and games destroying independent income. One of the reasons that it's so important you support your local farmers, they're trying to wipe out all independent farming income. It's, I don't know if you saw Congressman Massey, somebody asked him about the cattle tagging, which is really designed to kill the independent producers. He called it CBDC for cattle. Great quip. Okay, so we said, let's pick one jurisdiction where we think we have the best chance of making a contribution to ensuring financial transaction freedom within that jurisdiction. We decided we wanted to choose something, a state in the United States, and that was because under the Constitution, the powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states. And compared to what they have in Europe, that is an awesome, awesome power, okay, if we'll exercise it. So sure enough, we chose Tennessee, because my residence is in Tennessee, in Western Tennessee. We chose Tennessee, and I've spent the last 4 months trying to get the education. Rebecca, I'm trying to learn how to do what you do. And let me tell you, she knows how to do it, and I'm just learning. So I'm sort of the beginner, but I've been learning how to support the state legislators who are pushing for financial freedom. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. What I discovered was the number one obstacle. Can anybody guess what the number one obstacle? The number one obstacle is the state legislators, and a lot of the bankers don't know there's a problem. They don't see it coming. There is a train that is going to basically wipe out all small community banks, all small credit unions. The legislature is going to lose 100% of its power. The executive branch is going to lose 100% of its power eventually. Could take a while. They don't see it coming. They don't believe, and if you've lived your whole life with the kind of freedom we have in this country, if you've never been to some of the sort of horrible places in the world where the government has tyrannical control, it's very hard to fathom. So they don't see the problem coming. Okay, so to deal with that, I put together a commentary with 3 one-minute videos. I'm a great believer in short videos, so we call them shorties at the Solari Report. So I put together something with 3 one-minute videos where the central bankers tell you what they're going to do. Because that's the amazing thing, they're telling people what they're going to do. So I want to show you those 3 one-minute videos today. The first, I'm going to explain them and we'll do them one by one. The first is Augustine Carsons, who's the general manager of the Bank of International Settlements. Who here knows what the Bank of International Settlements is? Okay. You need to know this. The G20 just met in New Delhi in September, including the United States, and pledged allegiance to the Bank of International Settlements' global infrastructure of CBDC and digital ID to control you. And that includes China, India, Russia, the Anglo-American Alliance. They were all on board, okay? The Bank of International Settlements is the central bank of central banks. It has 63 members. All the top central banks in the world are members of the BIS, and it's running the process to essentially convert to an all-digital financial system, which is a control system. It's not a currency system. We're moving from a currency to a complete control system. Okay, so John Titus, who's my co-host and producer for Money and Markets Weekly, and I were watching an IMF panel in 2020. And Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and Augustine Carsons were on the panel. And I was raised to be a central banker. I was trained to be a central banker. And one of the things I would have told you in October 2020 when I was watching this, I have never in my life seen a central banker tell the truth in public. This was the first time. I almost fell off my chair. And I said to Titus, we have to grab that and show that. So sure enough, we did, and the rest is history, because this now goes everywhere. Has anybody here seen this video? Okay, a few people. Okay, so Dan, if we could let it roll.
Our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash, and there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
And if you come into Solari, we have a section called CBDC Shorts, and we have about 100 of these short videos. I'm just going to show you sort of the 3 best, and I'll describe a few more, but there's a ton if you want to explore it or share these with anybody. These are all available. Okay, next one. Let me just explain. The next one is 2023. Bo Liu used to be at the Bank of China. I don't remember if he was governor or deputy governor, but he was at the Bank of China, and then he became deputy managing director at the IMF. And here he's talking about programmability, which means they can program ahead of time your money so that they dictate how it can be used, where it can be used, and who it can be transacted with. Okay, go ahead.
The second aspect that CBDC can help improve financial inclusion is because of its legal tender status. Because CBDC is an obligation of central bank. And the obligation of central bank is a legal tender in every country. So it is widely accepted. That creates potential value for everyone to use it. And finally, the third way we think CBDC can improve financial inclusion is through what we call programmability. That is, CBDC can allow government agencies and private sector players to program, to create smart contracts, to allow targeted policy functions. For example, welfare payment. For example, consumption coupon. For example, food stamp. By programming CBDC, those money can be precisely targeted for what kind of people can own and what kind of use this money can be utilized, for example, for food. So this potential programmability can help government agencies to precisely target their support to those people who need support. So that way can also improve financial inclusion.
CBDC stands for Central Bank Digital Currency, and it's essentially an account at the central bank, and it can be done on a wholesale basis or a retail basis. But in theory, with this technology, you could take a banking system which now has about 4,500 banks in the United States and take it down to simply the central bank or 5 or 10 banks. So you're talking about radical and extreme consolidation of the banking system. One of the reasons we don't want to do that is the health of a local tax base and economy is enhanced. The more good banks you have and the more productive lending you have, the richer and healthier your economy. Same with productive farms. The more productive banks, the more productive farms. There's no such thing as too many as long as they're making productive loans instead of financing asset bubbles. So I'll get into that in a second. Okay, so the third one I want to show you, the Federal Reserve is a system of 12 banks around the country, and one of them is in Minneapolis. The mother lode is the New York Fed, which is the depository for the U.S. government, helps run the primary dealer system and the Treasury market, and has many sort of overt and covert functions. So this third video is the president of the Minneapolis Fed. So this is a Federal Reserve Bank president. He was talking at Columbia University in 2023, and he was warning people about CBDC and allowing this kind of central control. Now remember, this is a bank president. He's former official at the Treasury Security. He was one of the leaders who helped give away $27 trillion of your money to Wall Street. Okay, run the next one.
Because I'm pretty skeptical. I keep asking anybody at the Fed or outside of the Fed to explain to me what problem this is solving. I can send anybody in this room $5 with Venmo right now. Right? No, seriously. So what is it that a CBDC could do that Venmo can't do? And all I get is a bunch of hand waving. I get well, maybe it's better for financial inclusion. Maybe it's better for cross-border remittances. Maybe. Is there any evidence that it is? And they say, well, what about China? China's doing it. Well, I can see why China would do it. If they want to monitor every one of your transactions You could do that with the central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. If you want to impose negative interest rates, you could do that with the central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. And if you want to directly tax customer accounts, you could do that with the central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. So I get why China would be interested. Why would the American people be for that?
Is the bankers and CEOs of the credit unions are not warning them. The bankers and the credit unions have no idea that they're about to lose their business or they're subject to extraordinary consolidation and bank run. And this is not just from CBDCs. If you look at the kind of central control they're talking about, they can engineer financial transaction control without CBDCs. They can do it with credit cards. They can do it with bank accounts. They can do it with merchant accounts. I think most people in this room have heard about merchant accounts being used, so you can't basically write a check to a gun company, or use your bank for a gun company. So what we're opposed to is an all-digital system that allows total central control, because that is the end of state sovereignty, local sovereignty, and individual sovereignty. Boom. And it gives them the power to enforce any mandate in any area of the law, including food and healthcare. If they want you, if you don't eat bugs and you want to eat meat, they'll turn off your money. Now, there's a fourth video that I'm not going to show today. If you go to the shorts, it's the fourth video on the stack. And it's Richard Werner with me and a Danish politician in Malmö, Sweden, 2022, talking about the fact that a top executive director or managing director of one of the big central banks in Europe had explained to him that he's seen it, and it's a little chip, and it will be inserted in your hand. And if you listen to some of the footage at the World Economic Forum, they talk about that, about how we're all going to have a chip in our hand, and that's part of the digital ID system. Now, I hate to be this sort of gruesome on a beautiful spring Saturday morning, but you need to know what we're up against, and you need to know why there is no workaround. There is no way. All my life, people have said, well, it's not my problem. I'm just going to work around it, or I'm just going to, avoid this, or I'm just going to move my money to Switzerland and then I'll be okay. This is a global implementation of a control grid. And if you look at what's been happening for the last 2 years, the pushback is growing and fantastic. And this is a wave. This is like one of the greatest surfing waves that's ever happened in our culture. So many people have said, and I'll use the words of James Kunstler, who wrote this about a month ago. He said, all political divides in the United States have come down to one simple divide: the sane versus the insane. Okay? Really? And he said the sane have essentially about had it. And he said, stop calling these people communists or Marxists. That implies that they have a philosophy which is paying them way too much respect. And then the other thing he said is, we're all clear all of these things are just cudgels. Climate change is simply a cudgel to hit us over the head and steal our stuff. We get it, okay? So what you're seeing that's been fantastic for the last year is you've been seeing state attorney generals, state treasurers, state legislators just pushing back. And they're finally beginning to realize, okay, we're here to protect sovereignty. If we don't do it, no one will, so okay. And it's sort of one of my favorite performance artists is Curtis Mayfield. He's got a song where he says, you don't need a ticket, you just get on board. This is a train you want to be on. So now, what you find when you get on board and you start working with some of the fantastic legislators who are fighting this is not everybody's on board. Some people are like, okay, how can I help the central banks and make a lot of money? And they don't seem to understand they're on the menu. But frankly, they're so corrupted at this point. They've got control files. Everybody know what a control file is? It's like J. Edgar Hoover has the dirty pictures. So they got a control file, or they have many sort of obligations, or they want to make sure they can feed their family, and they don't want to upset this guy and that guy and this guy, but they're not on board for the fight. And so you have to sort of, when you get to the state legislature, you need to know, okay, who's on board for the fight and who's not. So first you need people to be educated, but then you need to sort it out, okay, who's on board for the fight. Now, once you sort that out and you say, okay, here we are. It's just in a Western state with a dinner of 12 of the most wonderful state legislators I've ever had the privilege of meeting, and one of them said to me, said, okay, here's the problem. Every year we send $1 to Washington and we get $1.19 back. Because central banks can print money, right? So they can always print more money than you send them. Okay, and he said the problem is all of our constituents want the money. So one of the things I said to him is, well, I've done the numbers and I've done a lot on place-based economics, and if you get 50 cents free and clear and can spend it any way you want, without all those terms and conditions and rules and regulations, like requiring you to teach your children how to be sex slaves, you know, you will be better off and have a stronger economy than if you take that $1.19. But that takes a lot of figuring out and change, and you need a critical mass of people who are saying, okay, we're going to deal with this. But why did the bankers want CBDC or the equivalent of CBDC? Why did they want that total control? What did we fight the American Revolution over? Taxation without representation, okay? And one of the wrap-ups we have here goes deeply into this question. Taxation, one of the bills we wrote in Tennessee this year, is a little early for it to go anywhere, was a proposal that the AG be authorized to create an escrow where citizens could pay their taxes into the escrow, send your 1040 to Washington, pay the taxes into a state escrow, which would represent you and deal with the fact that your tax money is being managed and spent illegally. So the state AG is organized to enforce the law with respect to the expenditure of tax money. And that is a complicated subject, but if you're interested in taxation or you're interested in the powers of the AG and what they could do, I strongly recommend you take a look at this taxation, because it goes through all the issues. Now, you know, sort of the good news and the bad news is, if you look at our pension funds, if you look at our stock portfolios, if you look at our savings, if you look at our banks, if you look at our insurance companies, if you look at our taxes, we are financing this. We are financing this, and we have the power to stop financing it. Especially because most every operation that they're using to do this is acting outside the law. So when I talked to the legislator in the Western state, he said, you know, the problem with that $1.19 is it's buying us into doing things that are unconstitutional and illegal, but everybody wants the money. And so we're coming down to a choice, and we're coming down to a choice in Alabama and Tennessee and every state in the country. Do we want the dollar with the law, and are we willing to enforce it, or do we want the $1.19 outside the law? It's a very sobering conversation, but that is the choice. Okay, so let's say your state was going to protect financial transaction freedom. What would you do? The first thing you need is you need a state bank, or you need some mechanism so that the state, the banks in the state, and the citizens can transact with each other without Washington, Wall Street, or Basel, Switzerland being able to stop you or shut you down. Okay? So right now you have the head of the European Union and the Secretary of Treasury in the United States proposing to seize Russian assets illegally. The French are an example of a more subtle way of doing this. The central bankers got together on August 22nd, 2019 to vote for the going direct reset. That is the reset we're in. The WEF, Great Reset, that's just marketing hype. We're in the going direct reset. It was designed by a group of central bankers working at the BlackRock Investment Institute. And there's a book here on the going direct reset that describes exactly how it all works. So they voted on the going direct reset, and the question, so they come back to, they leave Jackson Hole, Wyoming at the end of August. They come back to the Fed, and the first thing the Fed does is they go into the repo market and start to aggressively intervene in the markets. And through that process in the next 6 months, they injected $5 trillion directly into the economy and using private Wall Street firms to help them do it. This is unprecedented. And that's a huge, I remember one of the former Fed governors was giving a presentation to a group of Swiss investors, and one of my former clients was in the room and he sent me the video. And the guy basically said the inflation is going to be incredible. Now, they were able to hold it off for a while, but the inflation you're feeling is from that $5 trillion injection, and there was more from the ECB and the other central banks around the world. So that $5 trillion, now let me just ask you, did you get that $5 trillion? Yeah, somebody did. So I'm going to grossly oversimplify. They gave Wall Street $5 trillion, and then what's the next thing they did? They shut down Main Street. So instead of shutting down the banks the way they did in Argentina or Latin America, they just said, oh, we have a pandemic, we're going to shut down Main Street. So everybody's income, what happened to the income on Main Street? It went like that. So what happened? The market share of all those small businesses on Main Street got sucked up by Amazon and Costco. So you hear a giant sucking sound of market share off of Main Street into Wall Street, and Wall Street's got plenty of capital to deal with that. They're rolling in dough. Now, as that independent shuts down, a lot of people had to sell their real estate or their business or their home, right? So these guys have $5 trillion to go shopping, and these guys are forced to sell, okay? Now, why did that hold off inflation? Because you offset monetary inflation with some kind of deflation. When you shut down Main Street, you deflate. You kill the demand coming from Main Street, and you suck all the assets and the market share over to Wall Street. It was fantastically successful, unbelievably successful. But what did it do to the state's tax base? What did it do to the independent income? If you want to put people on programmable money, that's how you take away their income and get them on programmable money. Okay, so we had, that was step one of the Going Direct Reset. If you look at the new pandemics they're working on, they're not through. And if you look at the WHO Treaty, anybody here read the WHO amendments for the WHO Treaty? It's very long. Okay, they're planning on using the healthcare scam again to do this. I just got off the phone with somebody who was telling me they're working on vaccine manufacturing all around the world. I have a friend who's a big investor, and in Europe, they have investors being promised enormous returns to build big manufacturing plants all over Europe for more vaccines. And they're working on plans for mobile vaccines and semi-trucks, mobile vaccine laboratories and manufacturing capability so that they can make vaccines every 100 days. I told you, this is the sane versus the insane, right? So we just have to understand that this is where they're going. Okay. First thing you need is the state to protect financial transaction liquidity. You can do it with a state bank. There are other ways of doing it, but you have to be able to transact within the state without Wall Street or Washington or Basel being able to stop you down, shut you down. The second thing we recommend is the state bullion bank. If you go to Solari, we have a big memo on state bullion bank. We also have a great memo, and it's in the Future of Financial Freedom. The revenue officer in Tennessee said, could you write us a memo on what is financial transaction freedom, what threatens it, and what can we do about it? And that's up there in PDF form. You can just download it. It's for free. But a bullion depository, particularly if you make gold and silver legal tender, it means they can't corner you or squeeze you with CBDC or any of their other sort of legal tender things. But the most wonderful and best thing you can do is to protect cash and checks. Check is an open clearing system. Cash, has much less surveillance and makes it impossible to do an all-digital system. And we want to do everything we can to take, a very healthy financial system has a balance of analog and digital. There's nothing wrong with digital if we had a good governance system. We don't have a good governance system. Our governance system is controlled by organized crime. And as long as that's the case, we want to balance with analog. So let me tell you my favorite bill that we didn't get this year because of the fiscal note. But Rebecca, I want you to try and get this done in Alabama. And this is we have a senator named Senator Frank Nicely, who's to me one of the greatest politicians I have ever known in my life. I can't say enough good things about him. Of every human right you've ever enjoyed in your life. This is the end of the Constitution. This is the end of everything. And it's going to align and dovetail with the end of health freedom and the end of food freedom, which are very intricately involved, and they're involved for a couple reasons. One is you can't control financial transactions if you don't control food, because we can eat and barter and make our own currencies without them. So at the height of the Great Depression, there were 3,100 community currencies in America, which is interesting because there are about 3,100 counties. So on average, every county had a currency, and they were doing very well. And that's why the feds came out with a big work program, because they were losing control of the situation. The important one, as we do these different things, is dealing with taxation. So I strongly recommend, if you want to understand how criminal the federal government's management of our money is, we have two, Volume 1 and Volume 2. In 2018, I said, you know, we can't depend on the internet. We have to take all the evidence of the criminality at the federal government, and we have to print it in a hard copy and send it to all, you know, we sent it to, I don't know, 50 countries all around the world. So we wanted to make sure it couldn't be suppressed. When I started to write about the missing money, I said it was 1999, and huge amounts of money were disappearing from HUD and DOD all of a sudden. And as of, Dave, why are you louder? Bring it on. Okay. At the right before 9/11, I was working with a reporter, and we were doing a huge cover story in Insight magazine, which goes to all the senators and congressmen. It's very popular in Washington, about the fact that there was $4.3 trillion missing from the, or $3.3 trillion missing from the federal government. And the day before 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld gave up. It was coming out that Friday, so it was the Friday after 9/11, which was on a Tuesday. Donald Rumsfeld gave a press conference at DOD and said the DOD was missing 2.3. Now that was a modified hanger because they were missing 3.3. But he said, and we thought he was trying to get ahead of our story. Well, of course, we were wrong. And I said to Kelly after the press release, nothing can stop this story now. Well, I was wrong. The next day was 9/11. DOD got a $48 billion appropriation increase, and nobody cared about the missing money. In 2000, every year I would try and find out what the financial documents said about how much money was missing. In 2015, it was the greatest amount so far. It was $6.5 trillion. That put me at $12 trillion in missing money. I was talking about it on the radio, and a wonderful scholar from Michigan State University, Dr. Mark Skidmore, was listening. He's a budget expert, and he said, she has to be wrong. That's impossible. How could the federal government be missing more money than its total budget, multiples of its total budget? Can you imagine your pastor getting up in church and said, our budget last year was $500,000 at the church, and we're missing $5 million? Can you imagine that? Anyway, so it's sort of the equivalent. So he dove in and got all the financial statements and looked at it and discovered I was right. Federal government was missing $6.5 trillion from DOD and HUD, and he called me and said, can I help? I said, yeah, let's do a survey. And so he got his students, and we did a complete survey. I had it up to 12 trillion. He got it up to 21 trillion. That was 2017. And the month we published his report at Solari, guess how much the outstanding Treasury debt of the U.S. Treasury was on the books of the government? 21 trillion missing, 21 trillion in outstanding debt. So I sell your pension fund $21 trillion of bonds. The $21 trillion goes into Treasury, and then it leaves and goes out the back door. Okay? It's not there preserving the credit of your bonds. Now your bonds are just an IOU to yourself, because you, your homes, your real estate, your business, it's all backing those bonds, right? And they have the legal right to come and get that money in the worst case. So Mark said to me, Dr. Skidmore said to me, why do you keep on with this? Because every year you do this from 1998 on. And I said, there are two reasons. One is I had a meeting with the top pension fund advisors after the budget deal busted. So it was in 95 when it busted, but I was meeting with them in 1997. And I showed them our simulations of how, instead of centralizing federal government money, we could decentralize and build new wealth and use technology to help the decentralized and the small and Main Street be really wealthy. And I said, there's no reason for poverty. If you look at the wealth opportunity, if we decentralize, because I cannot stress to you how unbelievably expensive and wasteful the control grid is and centralization of economic and political power. You just cannot imagine how financially wasteful it is. Anyway, so I showed them our simulations of if we decentralized how much new wealth we could make that would support the baby boomers in their retirement. In other words, the pension funds could make a fortune in the equity investments. And the president of the largest pension fund in the country looked at me and he said, "You don't understand. It's too late. They've given up with the country. They're moving all the money out starting in the fall." And that fall was exactly when the 21 trillion started to go missing. So I said, "Mark, one of the reasons is I know that ultimately this is going to come back and bite the retirement obligations. And the reality is if you don't provide the funding for our retirement obligations, there is only one way mathematically that you can balance the obligations compared to the assets. One is to delay retirement, but the other is to lower life expectancy." Now, what I will tell you is the month after the budget deal broke, OxyContin was approved, the predatory lending was approved for poor neighborhoods, and what happened was, and I have an online book called Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits that describes this, was a massive onslaught on poor neighborhoods designed to lower life expectancies in the lower income groups. The pandemic was just a way of taking that to the middle class, okay? Okay, so for me, it was imperative because if we didn't address this financially, people were gonna die, okay? And all I can tell you is if you look at the 21 trillion, 20 trillion of that is missing from DOD, Department of Defense. I know I'm saying this in Huntsville. And I know we need a good defense, so I'm not objecting to that. What I will tell you is DOD ran Operation Warp Speed, and there is a connection between those two things. And that has to be faced. Okay, so on that cheery note, let me talk about what we need to do. The first thing we need to do is make sure everybody understands this, and here's why. The World Economic Forum has said it's 2030 and you have no assets. Everybody, who's heard that? Okay, so everybody's heard that. This is how they get your assets. If they have control of your transactions, you know, they have 1,000 different ways of taking your assets. So I'm always fighting. I have these great entrepreneurial allies in Tennessee, and they're always saying, we don't have time to go to the state legislature. You know, we have to stay here and make more money. And I keep saying, you know, why do you think that money is going to, you're just making more money for them to seize. You don't understand. This fight is for all the marbles. So I can't have assets unless you have assets. You can't have assets unless I have assets. And we're not going to have assets unless we have a sovereign government that will ensure that we have assets from the state all the way down to the sheriff. So you care. And you care that Rebecca is up there fighting for you at the legislature, and you're following up with those actions. So we need to bring transparency, but we need to get in the game. Now, the good news, there are two parts of the game. One is you have to back up tyranny, which you can do with cash and checks, and that doesn't require any political confrontation other than occasionally walking out of the hot dog stand at Costco. But we have to back up tyranny. But the other thing is we have to do a building wealth reset. We do need a reset. We do need a financial reset. The way we're running an economy, especially with a centralized control grid, is very uneconomic. We're pumping out financial methadone and allocating resources to things that make absolutely no economic sense. My online book, Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits, is a great example of that. It's about private prisons. Stupidest economic game or model I've ever seen in my life. It's horrible. Anyway, but it supports central control. So, and the other thing is I always say crime that pays is crime that stays. When you lobby at the state legislature, what you discover is everybody's got obligations to somebody, and nobody sees clearly how much central banking money is rolling in and buying them in thousands of ways that they're not even conscious of. I litigated with the Department of Justice, and it never, you know, every day it took my breath away who they could get to and how they could corrupt them. But again, back to the sane versus the insane. The sane have to understand now is the time for the sane to act. We don't need 100% of the population. We need 5 to 10% of the population. That's what did the Revolutionary War. 5 to 10% of the population says, we are the sane, and we are not putting up with insane. We are not pretending that insane's okay. We're not financing insane. We're not going along with insane. And if you will support your state legislators, if you will support your state AGs, if you will support your state treasurers who are willing to do this, you know, this year we had an incredible success with something called natural asset companies. Who here knows what a NAC or natural asset company is? Few people. Okay. This is an idea that came out of the SEC and the New York Stock Exchange. Let me just tell you a story about the SEC. Okay, so the SEC is in charge of making sure the securities markets are liquid and the transparency is available and the markets, function according to the law. So in 2018, after Skidmore and I published the study on the 21 trillion missing money, which is, by the way, $65,000 per person for everybody in this room. $65,000 for every person in this room. Okay, when we published that study, there was a big hullabaloo in the federal government, and in 2018, while you were distracted by the Kavanaugh hearings, okay, everybody remember the Kavanaugh hearings? The White House, under Donald Trump, the Senate and the House, Republican and Democrat, all of them together, agreed to a policy called Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board 56 that said, as an administrative policy, it said, we do not have to provide financial statements and open books, and so we can violate the Constitution, the federal management laws, and the federal management regulations as a matter of administrative policy, and we can take the financial statements of the U.S. government dark. And if you add in the classification laws, it means we can take the financial statements of the big banks and companies and defense contractors doing business with the federal government, we can take those dark. So they took this administrative policy and they sent it around what used to be called the reg process, where they invite all the agencies to comment on it. And HUD, they sent it around to HUD, where there's $1 trillion missing. And HUD said, oh, this is great, we need this, which raises the question, why does a domestic housing agency need to have secret books? So then we went to to the SEC, and you know what the SEC said? No comment. So it's a proposal to take the U.S. securities market dark, and they have no comment. Okay, so that's the SEC. The SEC came out with something called natural asset companies. We did some great interviews with Margaret Byfield of American Steward of Liberty if you want to sort of learn more about it. But it was a proposal that would give unprecedented control of land, including federal and state land, to private parties. There were 22 treasurers who jumped on board and started to question it, then 26 AGs who jumped on board, then the congressman from Wyoming in the Natural Resource Committee jumped on it, and then state legislators. We wrote a bill for Tennessee, we passed it to everybody, and state legislators started to work on it, and suddenly the SEC and the New York Stock Exchange pulled the proposal. Because it was a swarm. It was too many people asking too many questions. They were trying to sneak it through, and they couldn't. So remember when I said, the train is on the way, you want to get on board. Because something is happening, and the sane have decided they're not going to live with the insane, and they're not going to join them. Okay, so as I said, we have these books. I just want to show you what we have. We have a 2-volume set on missing money, and I think Focus on America is asking you for a donation of $20 for each book. And then we have one on the Going Direct Reset. This is the real reset. It's not the one at the World Economic Forum. That's the marketing hype. This is the real one. Taxation. What do we do about taxation and what the problem is? The future of financial freedom, and again, the memo on what is financial transaction freedom, what threatens it, and how to protect it is on the website for free, as are the CBDC shorts. And then finally, we just published a huge study on the Dutch farmers and fishermen. If you want to understand what's happening with the European farmers, this will tell you everything you need to know. We wrote this, in fact, because I have a hairdresser in Stavoren in the Friesland in the Netherlands who has lots of farmers and fishermen as her customer. And what I discovered was that the farmers and fishermen didn't see the whole control grid and how they fit in. And as I talked to my neighbors didn't understand. They're trying to take everybody's assets. The farmers are first. They're not different. They're just the tip of the spear. So if you don't protect them, they're going to come take your property eventually, because everybody's on the menu, but it's sequenced to think, oh, well, it's not me, I'm special. Okay? So we wrote this so that the farmers could see how they fit into the whole control grid. And our neighbors could see how the farmers were really fighting for all of our property rights. And if you've never been to the Netherlands, I got to tell you, the Dutch farmers are one of the great groups of people in the world, and they know how to fight. I hate to say this, they're even better than Yankees. Okay, so those Sarah has those are up there, and I hope you will be generous with Focus on America, because I can't tell you how important what they're doing is. I just think it's unbelievably important. It's real trench warfare in the state legislatures because there is a tsunami of central bank financed lousy legislation coming in. And you've got to, remember when I said you got to stop tyranny, but then you got to pass bills that build the building wealth reset and decentralize economic power and political power down to us. So it's a two-step process, and you've got your hands full. It's, Rebecca, I liken it to the story of Nehemiah, where you have to have a weapon in one hand and a tool in the other. You got to be fighting off the bad guys while you're building the wall at the same time. And it's very hard to do, but it's very, very important. So with that, we have time for questions, but before I do, I want to thank Gary, because I'm going to be over there to get my stuff. And I want to thank Focus on America. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. And again, for them, a round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, whether you realize it or not, this has been filet mignon with lobster tail and a house salad, grass-fed, yes, regardless of your cuisine
I know,
choice.
but they lost their state of amusement. We got to get it back. Right.
So we're going to turn it over now to a Q&A period. If you have a question for Catherine, please raise your hand. We'll get to you. All right? Bob has a microphone on this side of the room. He'll start us off.
Hey, place first.
Oh, yes.
I just wanted to ask, where do we find those 1-minute videos? Where do we get
Yeah,
them?
so if you go to solari.com, my website, SOLARI, so it's solar plus I. Down on the right-hand side, you'll see something that says CBDC Shorts, and beneath it, you'll see Food Shorts. So we're a great believer in short videos, 1-minute videos that communicates important ideas, and you can find them all there.
Our homegrown hero, Clay, has a question.
I just wanted to know, because it seems like our federal government's not even in charge of all the financial stuff. I've never dealt with the SEC, but I'm in security, and I had to go in and help the FOA. And that's when I found out, in most other federal agencies, the way you make them follow security is you threaten to take their funding away. Well, with the FDIC, it's totally different. They follow this international banking laws, and they run under all this stuff. So it seemed like, the people that say they guarantee the banks that your money's going to be safe aren't even under the control of the U.S. government. Is that the same across?
Yes. So there's something, two points I want to make here. There's something called systemically important banks under the BIS framework. And the precedent has been that they are above the law. The BIS has sovereign immunity, and they are free there's an appearance issue, but if you, we've done a lot of work on being able to document and prove that they're operating above the law, which why I always say never bank with a systemically important bank, because you're basically dealing with a criminal enterprise. I do want to tell one story and bring this back to the root of the problem in the local area. Okay, who here, I'm going to do this again, I'm going to tell the red button story again. I know Margaret's heard the red button story. How many people here have heard the red button story? Okay, it's not too bad. Okay, I apologize, Margaret. It's probably your 5th time. Okay, so in the summer of 2000, I was giving a speech to a wonderful group of people called Spiritual Frontiers Foundation International in Philadelphia. They have a conference once a year to figure out how to help our society evolve spiritually. They're very nice people. They're very well educated. They really care, very caring people. And a friend of mine who was a healthcare practitioner asked me to give a speech called How the Money Works on Organized Crime, which later became a very successful and famous article called Narco Dollars for Beginners, which ended up getting translated all around the world. And it was meant to be a light and funny explanation for people who aren't interested in crime to see how criminal money intersects with Washington and Wall Street and affects our politics. So I was in the middle of the speech and I was describing the narcotics trafficking by U.S. intelligence agencies through Mena, Arkansas during the when the Clinton was governor, and it was a partnership between the Clintons and the Bushes, and it was highly documented by a number of people, including a reporter named Gary Webb, who wrote a book called Dark Alliance, but had a very famous series on all of this. But the discussion was about congressional hearing on the Dark Alliance allegations that occurred in 1998. So at the time of those hearings, a reporter that I was working with in Washington, who was doing the missing money story as well, was told by a Department of Justice spokesperson that the U.S. economy launders $500 billion to $1 trillion of all dirty money, thus making us the global leader in our financial system and the global leader in illegal money. So that's narcotics trafficking, sex slave trafficking, illegal gambling, everything. So I said to and the number is much bigger now because of financial fraud. So I said to this wonderful group of spiritually evolved people, what would happen if we stopped being the global leader in money laundering? And they said, well, you know, our IRAs and 401ks might go down because that money would go to Singapore and Zurich and Hong Kong. And you know, our government, our taxes might go up because the government would have trouble financing itself. Our government checks might stop. And I said, okay, well, let's pretend there's a big red button up here on the lectern. And if you push that button, you can stop all hard narcotics trafficking in your city, your county, your state, tomorrow, thus offending the people who control $500 billion to $1 trillion of dirty money and the accumulated capital thereon. Out of 100 people dedicated to evolving our society spiritually, guess how many would push the button? 1. Now, I didn't vote. It would have been 2. And I said, why would you not push the button? I wouldn't let him talk. The other 99, why would you not push the button? They said, we don't want our 401ks and IRAs to go down. We don't want our taxes to go up, and we don't want our government checks to stop. So I said, you want the U.S. intelligence agencies to continue to market narcotics trafficking into your neighborhoods to the kids in your state to keep your IRAs up? And they said, yeah, that's right. And what I discovered that day was they felt they had a fiduciary obligation to their family, and they had to take care of that first. And the problem was so big and overwhelming, they couldn't face it or deal with it. And what I discovered, the problem was that they wouldn't push the red button. The problem was they wouldn't go into the invention room and say, you know, we are liquidating our population with financial methadone. How do we deal with this? How do we do something? How do we change this? But this is exactly at the heart of the $1.19 problem. Now, I asked this last time, so you can't volunteer again. Who here is willing to be president of the United States next year? Anybody? And what's your name? What's your name? Shima? Shima. Okay, so Shima's walks into the Oval Office. Okay, who's willing to be her Karl Rove political advisor? Okay, Rebecca is your Karl Rove kind of political advisor. Okay, Sarah, will you be Secretary of the Treasury? Sure. Okay. See, I love these guys. They just stand up. Okay, so you walk into the Oval Office and you turn to Rebecca and you say, okay, what do we do? And Rebecca says, well, the American people just spent several $billions to get you elected, and now they want payback. They want their community block development grant. They want their, COLA increase. They want their defense contract. They want, they want money. They want their pork. And so you turn to Sarah and you say, okay, well, how are we going to get the money? And Sarah says, you better be nice to the people who control $500 billion to $1 trillion a year and the accumulated capital thereon. And that's why Jim Carville once said, when I die and am reincarnated, I want to come back as the bond market because you can control everyone. But in fact, you don't need to be the bond market. If you look at the $21 trillion that we've issued, we didn't need to issue $21 trillion of debt. We don't need to be in a debt trap. We could have issued that $21 trillion as currency because we don't need a central bank. Okay, as long as you issue and spend the money on productive activity, you don't need to issue it as debt. The problem is not that we have a fiat currency. Throughout history, fiat currencies have been the best performing currencies when you have a good governance system. The problem is it's debt-based, and we're creating a debt and putting ourselves in a debt trap. I hate to say this, when you go into the Oval Office on January 20th, what you're going to discover is you don't have information sovereignty, and you don't have financial sovereignty. And Washington is in a debt trap, and the reason countries around the world are signing the WHO treaties, when you talk to leadership in Europe, they say, look, we know this is terrible, we don't want this, but if we don't sign it, the bankers will pull our loans and not roll over our debt. Everybody's in a debt trap, which is why, whether it's taxation or what our retirement funds are doing or what's in our stock portfolio, we have to deal with the money. I just did an interview with James Kunstler, and he said, don't you think we're all going to get our guns and fight back? And I said, waste of time. If we don't have a tax, if we don't bring the law to the management of our tax money, that is the revolution we need. We need a revolution that returns our tax money to the law. That will work. Guns won't work. Guns will not do it. Don't give up your gun. Second Amendment is unbelievably important. When I left Washington, I said, if there is one thing I learned in Washington is, I would be willing to die for the Second Amendment. Okay. Another question?
Thank you for that comprehensive response, Catherine.
Sorry.
Mike has another question for us.
The missing 21, and I didn't quite track that. Where did that money go?
That is a wonderful question. And I have many theories, but the only thing I can give you is conjecture. But let me give you a couple of sort of ideas, because I could talk for 2 hours about where I think it went. If you move $21 trillion into a trust fund and you earn 5% on it, you got $1 trillion a year to run the world government, right? Right, so I think one of the ways, anybody who has a business knows, if I have a system and I want to bring up a new system, I bring up the new system and I make sure it's working before I bring down the old system, okay? So they were moving money and assets out and putting it in the new system, and now they're ready to bring down the old system, and pandemic was first step of bringing down the old system. So I used to say it was I used to call this the breakaway civilization, and I said the breakaway civilization is breaking back in with the pandemic. But when I was at HUD, I had a meeting with a cabinet secretary who got really mad at one of the regional administrators, and the regional administrator said to him, but Mr. Secretary, I had to do that, it's the law. And the secretary just exploded in a tantrum of sputtering spit and said, the law? The law? I don't have to obey the law, I report to a higher moral authority. And I think what he was talking about was that, that separate entity.
Again, if you have a question, please raise your hand.
Right over here.
Thank you. Hi, Catherine. Good to see you again.
Hi.
I have a question. You asked me last year, what could Solari do for me? Okay, so I'm going to take a rain check because I didn't do a good job at that point. So it has to do with federal income tax. And I was thinking, now, who could we have do a deep dive on who actually owns or should pay federal income tax? Because I'm all for it. If I owe it, I will pay it. So I thought Whitney Webb would be really good to dive deep into that to find out who should be paying it. Now, I know there's a question yet to come. So from my understanding, and see if you're familiar with this,
Uh-huh.
in the research I've been doing. And it turns out that Dave Chapman, I just heard him last week, and he wrote a book, Income Tax Shattering the Myths. Well, it turns out that, from my understanding, I mean, that'd be a good one to interview. Now, of course, you've already have a target in your back and everything, so it is asking
so I'm
another
not
one.
worried about target in my
Okay.
back, but here's the situation. So I don't think the federal income tax is legal. That's what I believe, based on my preliminary research. But that doesn't matter, because the only way you're going to change that, you know, we have the lawless upstairs and the lawful down here. And courts follow culture. What you need is an organized systemic pushback on taxes that says we are the bringer of the law. Because every time you say we don't really owe federal income taxes, all your neighbors think you're trying to get out of paying, and they need it for Social Security. So what I'm talking about is you need a political movement that integrates the legal issues but holds them responsible for their violation of the financial management laws. Now, what everybody tells me is that's too boring. But I have news for you. You know, at some point when we need the money and they've stolen it, it's not that boring. So I just think, you know, the idea of states organizing to help, you know, citizens push back in a way that brings, we need to be the bringer of the law, because we're not going to get out of this with lawlessness. We're going to get, you know, we're going to get out of this by bringing the law against the organized crime.
Thank you so much. Roberts has a question about local currency.
Okay. So just to add levity back a little bit, does anybody remember a Saturday Night Live skit called The Change Bank? You can go on YouTube and Google Change Bank and find it, but it was just a skit about a fake ad for a bank that only made change for people.
Mm-hmm.
And after they did the ad, a person said, well, I don't understand, if you only make change and you don't make a profit, how do you stay in business? And the person just kind of says volume. We just do lots of volume. But I was thinking in terms of local currencies, you know, if you create a bank, you're immediately subject to CRA regulations and stress tests and all these things. Insurance companies have their own sets of regulations. For the purpose of just keeping a free district for free exchange, can it be as simple as local ledgers and units on account and creating a, you had the interview with Werner where you talked about the Austrian town?
Right. So I believe so.
Yep.
And that's one of the reasons they want to control food. Because if you don't control food and you do things like that, you don't need money. You don't need their money. So I agree. There's a lot of, Tom Greco wrote a book long ago about all the community currencies and sort of what happened. And we've seen that anytime we get in a really bad economic patch, you know, we see the decentralization of money. And again, I can't tell you the waste. I mean, the waste that comes from a debt-based currency system and the waste that comes from enormous amounts of fiscal money pouring into centralized control. Let me give you another example. Anybody ever heard of Chuck Marone and Strong Towns? No? It's a group I recommend to you. So Chuck Marone was a municipal engineer, and he was very concerned that communities were taking federal government grants for infrastructure that significantly increased their maintenance costs in a way that the private economy couldn't support. So he got hired, he would talk with people about this, he got hired by the city councilman in Lafayette, Louisiana, because the council wanted to take another grant, and the councilman was trying to stop it because he said they couldn't afford to support the grant. And the maintenance on the grant. The feds were going to fund the whole infrastructure, but then they were going to have to maintain it. So he hired Chuck, and Chuck did an analysis of the maintenance requirements for federally funded infrastructure projects in Lafayette, Louisiana. And what he discovered is if they were just going to keep the maintenance going to the sort of basic municipal standards, that Lafayette, Louisiana would have to raise their property taxes from an average of $1,500 to $8,500 per home. And what he said to me, I did an interview with him on the Solari Report, he said, you know, Detroit's just first. And in fact, I was up in the western states, and a bridge engineer said to me, we just shut down another 3 bridges because we can't afford to maintain them. So we're facing these questions when you look at Washington sends $1.19 back. They send it back with terms and conditions that end up creating a very unhealthy economy.
And okay, we have one over here. Yes, hey, thank you for being here today. This might seem like a tangential question, but can you give us any insight? I mean, I have some ideas, but can you give us your insight as to what the end goal of this massive illegal immigration operation is into the U.S., and what does that ultimately do other than replace American workers with low-wage foreign workers?
Right.
Is there more to it than that?
Yes, so it does a variety of things. One, you supply new people for the military because you're not meeting your draft targets and you just lowered life expectancy in the southern states that you get military from, young people for the military. So it gives you people for the military. It gives you people for various kinds of employers. A lot of people come in with the name and address of the employer who's sponsoring them. But the third thing you do is you give a wonderful bulge of phenomena that will get the people in the heartland, the conservatives, to support digital IDs and a control grid. We need a control grid to stop the foreign boogeyman who's coming in, and they're going to be terrorists, and we'll have terrorist events, so we need complete control. And I assure you, if and when the Republicans win the presidential election, they are going to be pushing the control grid, but with a conservative heartland spin. Now, I'll give you a perfect example. So, and I have these wonderful allies in Tennessee, and I'm always bickering with them because they immediately, you know, this is some of the fear porn they fall for. So, did anybody see Christopher Wray? He was a sheriff from Ohio. No, I'm sorry. Christopher Wray, who's the FBI head, had a hearing or a briefing of sheriffs in Washington. And a sheriff from Ohio came back to Ohio and had a press conference and basically promoted the foreign boogeyman is coming, you know, across the border, and we need to organize and protect our families and communities from terrorists. And I'm not saying that's not happening. And so these wonderful allies had an immediate and very strong alpha male response. We've got to organize and get out our guns, and we're going to do this, and we're going to have meetings. And I just said, don't you understand the only foreign boogeyman you need to worry about is at 33 Liberty Street in New York? Okay. The guys who hired Christopher Wray and are financing Christopher Wray are arranging for these people. They're financing these people coming across the border, and they are playing you. They are playing you. Don't do that. Do not fall into that trap. So, you know, part of it is the foreign boogeyman. You want people to have a storyline of what they can be against that's going to help you get them to support more control in building your control grid.
Thank you, Catherine. We have another question from one of our online listeners. How do we overcome, and this probably is the state sovereign bank issue that you've addressed many times, how do we overcome FDIC insurance protection with a state bank or a sovereign bank at the state level?
Well, that's a very good question, and there are different ways of doing it. One is you can, you know, ultimately states, if they want to, can provide a state-based system. You know, to do that, you've got to protect a healthy economy and have a healthy state. You know, so it's part of the integrated picture. Right now, what bankers tell me is the problem that one of the reasons banks are falling is not because big banks are buying little banks. It's always been that way. New banks aren't getting started because the banking rules are so onerous. And they're controlling us by saying, okay, unless you follow all these rules, you can't get FDIC. So this is one of the issues that has to be dealt with. Again, I would say if you look at how unbelievably wasteful the federal money is and its impact on us, we have the resources to do all of these things. So even if we have to provide our own bank insurance, we can do it. You know, if we're willing to run the economy on a lawful and productive basis. You know, and I just have to say at the root of this is a spiritual war. And you know, one of my favorite quotes is from a guy named John Edward Hurley, who used to run the Confederate Museum in Washington. And John Edward would say, culture is the integration of the divine in everyday life. If we're going to have a productive economy, one that can support a state bank insurance, you know, we have to have that kind of culture. And we can't have that kind of culture with the terms and conditions that are coming in on that $1.19. So we're going to have to choose whether it's the law of gods or the law of the Constitution. You know, both laws, it's, you know, we can choose the law or we can choose the money. And all these difficult, complicated, uncomfortable things we're going to have to deal with. Or at least these guys are going to have to deal with it because they're running the White House.
Another question online. I'm sure you're familiar with John Grant or Old Glory. John Rich, excuse me. How is that different from any other bank?
John Rich.
John Rich or Old Glory?
I don't. Oh, Old Glory Bank. I thought you said Old Glory Bank. Okay, no, Old Glory Bank. I've looked at their website and I know nothing about them. Because normally if you look at the standard due diligence, I used to be an investment advisor and there's a standard due diligence you do of a bank. And there wasn't enough information at the time because they were new. So I don't know anything about them.
Another question over here.
Okay, one from me.
Uh-huh.
I'm about to retire for the third time. And
you know what's going to happen. They're going to put you back to work. And
well, I might have to go back to work just to eat. But anyway, looking into the future, any advice for us out here, how to protect the assets we have currently accumulated so that we have a decent future for us financially?
So when they say it's 2030 and you have no assets, they're serious. So they intend to take them. And that means political organization to stop it. So I would say the first investment you need to make is that. But you've clearly already done it, right? So you're doing an amazing thing with Focus on America. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, it is very important that everything you do in your financial life is done with people and institutions of integrity. You need a bank that has integrity, not a systemically important bank that steals money. You need, in every part of your life, wherever you can, you need people of real quality. If you have, I can't tell you how many times my life has been saved by an honest, high-integrity CPA or an honest, high-integrity attorney. Okay, so that's number one. The first thing I would say is you need to invest in making sure the number one reason for financial failure by families in America, anybody guess what it is? I call it the great poisoning. You are not attending to the food, the water, and the health you need to take care of yourself. You need to learn how to take care of your health, and you need to spend the money, whether you're doing your own gardens or supporting local farmers, to make sure that you and your family are healthy. And if you look at the deterioration in the water and in the food system, in the air, we are dealing with a long-term poisoning. So the first thing is I would say protect, get great at health. The second thing I would say is going to surprise you, and I'm going to repeat what I said the last time I was here. When the litigation began with the federal government, they shut off every form of income and credit that I had. They just completely, it's like getting surrounded. And it turned out that I had loaned or gifted $250,000 to family and friends. I was very successful, and my attitude was the reason I have money is so I can help my family and friends. So if somebody needed help, I would help them. But I never counted it up. And so when the litigation began, one thing led to another, and I counted up I had given or lent $250,000. And one of my uncles was wealthy, and he bought a piece of farmland from me. I had a share of the family farm. And I said, if you do this and you help me, the feds may show up. And sure enough, the FBI showed up at 9 o'clock at night in New Hampshire at his door, scared him, his wife to death. And luckily I had warned him, but they said, you shouldn't help your niece because they're trying to shut off my money. And so there was a big family conference call. I wasn't invited. And everybody said, well, we got to drop her because the feds will come after us. And he said, no. She helped everyone else, so I'm not going to drop her. And over the next 11 years, people gifted or lent me money. And then when I won the litigation, I was able to pay all the loans back. And I counted it up at the end of that 11 years. And you know how much I'd been gifted or loaned or repaid? $250,000. I couldn't believe it. It was so perfect, it was scary. And when I settled the litigation, I'd had to bust a 401k and pay out $500,000. I paid $225,000 of fees. They had put it under audit, so I couldn't use it to finance the company. It's a very dirty trick. And the 500 came back, and my CPA said, oh, let's fund up your 401k. I said, I'm never going into partnership with the U.S. government. I have my own company, so I have plenty of tax shelter without that. And I said, I'm going to take that 500,000, I'm going to bonus it back out on the People Bank because it's safe there. I was sure they were going to come after me on the taxes, and sure enough, it took 4 years of fighting over the taxes. When that was over, I had spent $150,000 on lawyers and accountants, and guess how much I owed in taxes? 0. But it took 4 years, and it was a huge thing. Anyway, and one of the reasons I owed 0 was I'd taken that 500,000 and put it on the People Bank. Okay, now let's go through other things. There is your own knowledge, education, and business. There is deposits in a good bank. You can get very attractive yields right now on a good bank. And then there are great enterprises and stocks. I'm a stock market investor. I love enterprise. To me, enterprise is the source of family wealth. I was an investment advisor for 10 years. The way everybody lost money was by being poisoned, health. The way they made money was by building a family enterprise like Black Patch Distillery. So they started a business, they started an engineering practice, they started a cardiology practice, but they started something doing something they loved and they really cared about, and they did a great job at it, and that's how they made most of their money. So if you or people in your family have those enterprises, it's a great investment. A lot of great companies get invested because the parents and grandparents, you know, invest with the kids. And then there are local investments as well. But I come back to whatever you're putting in your money in, whether it's stocks, whether it's bonds, whether it's bank deposits, you need to care about the integrity of the people who are governing and managing that entity, okay? People lose money when they put money in Enron. They lose money when I cleaned up a couple of people for Madoff. They lose money when you do business with people who don't have integrity. And if you keep doing business with people who do have integrity, you know, you get somewhere.
Quick follow-up on that. One real quick follow-up. Your opinion on gold and silver.
I love gold and silver. I love gold and silver. I'm a gold and silver, you know, right now. I love silver more. I've been buying silver for 2 years because it's in the doghouse, but now it's shooting up. So I'm like, you know, where's my sale? I love gold and silver. I'm very concerned, though, right now, and I think gold and silver, if you go to Solari, I have a great piece called What Percentage of My Assets Should I Hold in Gold Silver? And it describes 2 positions. Your core position, which is what I call central bank insurance. That's for the worst case. Your core position, and then the second is your investment position. I believe gold and silver look very good from both a core position and an investment position right now, subject to the fact that we could get some very significant gut-wrenching scenarios politically that could whack the price around. When you go into something like gold and silver, you need to make sure you're going to stay, because it's exceptionally volatile. It's funny, I had a client who bought at about 400, and I had worked with them to warn them, this is very volatile, and you have to promise me if you do this, you're prepared for the volatility, and you won't sell if we get a big drop. Sure enough, we bought at 400, and then it suddenly dropped to 375 or 350. I mean, it was a gut-wrenching drop, and I was able to keep him from selling, and then, of course, the last time I talked to him, it was 2,300. So now here's the problem with gold and silver. Gold and silver just sit there and do nothing. I mean, if we use gold and silver as currencies, we have a gold and silver calculator at Solari that'll help you use it as currencies. And if you get the sales tax off of it and make it legal tender so you don't have capital gains taxes, then we can use it for currency. But let me warn you about this. Right now, what percentage of the population in Alabama own precious metals? What do you think? 1%? 5%? Let's just say 5%. Okay. So, and how much precious metals does the state own? Nothing, right? And how much did the banks and credit unions own? Nothing. Okay. How much gold and silver do the central bankers have? A lot. So if we switch to a gold and silver system when they have a lot and we have none, or almost none, that's called a short squeeze. And of course, when they come in for disaster capitalism, that's what they do. They set up a short squeeze. So I love gold and silver, and I think states should have a state bullion depository, but it's more important that you have dollar liquidity through the banks and the government and the citizens, and they can't shut you down on your currency and your dollars, because if they can and they put you in gold and silver, they've got you in a short squeeze, and they're going to have a field day.
Catherine, a couple more questions. Okay, get this here.
So what if you, with your 401ks and IRAs, what keeps the government from taking all that away? I mean, people rely on that, or your savings account, any of that. It could be gone in a weekend if they shut everything down.
If they get financial transaction control, then they can take it all. So if they get financial transaction control, now that doesn't mean they'll take it right away. They can also skim it and inflate it and play games and all sorts of, there's all sorts of backdoor things they can do to do it slowly, so that you're like the frog in the pot. You don't necessarily notice it. If you look, they tried to monkey with the 401ks and IRAs during the financial crisis, and one of the things we say is, we'll change it to an annuity, and you get an interest, and then it's our money when you die, and nobody inherits it. And there was a firestorm, and a real firestorm, and that's when I discovered people get a lot of solace politically from their stock portfolios and securities portfolios that they don't necessarily get from their other assets. But so they won't do that soon. One of the ones in an emergency they could do is say, okay, all the IRAs and 401ks have to buy treasuries. So just like they're pulling money out of our pension funds, they could do, and that's the annuity idea. They could do the same with the 401ks, but they're going to be very careful about how they do that, because the last time they tried to do it, they tried to monkey with it. It really set off a storm. No one will discuss doing anything like that before the election. Now, after the election.
And second question is, I recently moved back to Arab, a small town 30 minutes south of here, and I was in Brentwood, Tennessee, and my dad is a farmer and started a farm years ago, and he was like, you need to move back, we need to corral the family, and I was like, if I'm leaving Brentwood, I'm going to the beach, that's the only, I'm never moving back. Well, and he said, you're going to need to do it before it gets bad, and everybody's going to think you're crazy. And so I cried for 6 months because I made the decision to leave. And now when I go back to see my friends, it's just unbelievable how it's changed in just 2 years. And then I noticed too, he would tell me, how bad things are getting. And I was like, well, everything here in Brentwood's fine. They're building things.
Yeah, they have a tsunami of central banking money pouring in.
And it's like, people are driving around in Ferraris but when you get out of the cities, people are hurting.
Right.
And, I think the cities are going to, in Huntsville too, because of the military, is going to be, they're going to be one of the last ones to realize what's actually going on, because it's going to be so good still.
Right.
And so my question is for you, since you live in Tennessee, have you seen a big difference since you've moved there? Like people.
So I moved there in 2000, and I live in Hickory Valley, Tennessee. And at one point, somebody put a website article up. Some developers tried to do a big thing in Hickory Valley, and it failed. And right after that, a website went up that said that the 10 worst communities in Tennessee to live in were, they listed 10, and we were at the top. And everybody cheered. They was like, great, they'll stay away longer. So I live in a very poor rural area, and I think I'm the only person I know whose house hasn't gone up in value since 2006. I bought the house next door in 2006. So, and I poured a lot of money into fixing it up just right. But you see a huge divide between where the sort of the debt money's rolling in it's Knoxville, Chattanooga, and Nashville, not so much Memphis. Memphis is in real trouble, versus the what's happening in the rural area. The one thing I would say is even the people driving around in Ferraris are getting poisoned. And that's what you have to remember. They may not know they're on the menu, but they're on the menu. But right now they're getting poisoned. And having farmland and being able to work with other farmers and make sure you have a good food system, that is the ultimate luxury. I'll never forget being in Zurich, and some of the Swiss money managers that I was working with had literally said, that's it, we've had it. And the food in Switzerland is fantastic. They bought a farm and imported a farming family from Romania just so that they could have a dedicated, food supply. Because you really have to know where your food is coming from. And it's otherwise, well, I didn't bring it today, but the companion piece to Dutch Farmers and Fishermen is something called Pharma Food. We did a big thing on pharma food. It's all about synthetic meat, and insect-based flour and things like that. It is I'm famous for being able to read anything. I don't care how bad the news is, I can read it, I can deal with it. I could not finish Pharma Food. We hired a great Dutch reporter, Elsa van Hamelen, to do it. And she sent me the draft, and I couldn't finish it. I had to put it down, take a walk, take a break, sleep, get up the next morning, get a big coffee, double espresso, and then finish it because it's so horrible. And I said to Elsa, the only way you could get people to eat this stuff is if you control their financial transactions, and they have no choice. That's how they're going to market this. John Kerry, climate change czar, said we need to get rid of all the farmers, not some of the farmers. They're planning on feeding you synthetic food, truly. I mean, it's that nuts.
We know
that's why I'm saying have fun with the pushback, because now's the time.
We know that many of you have questions. We have one last question here. If you do have further questions for Catherine, please come see her afterwards. She will be available. Her books, let me highly recommend all of her books to purchase and to actually read. Okay? One last question from Rebecca. Yes.
And if you're not a member of Solari, go to the website. It is very well worth your very little bit of investment monthly, and it will help you help me, so I'm still telling you for selfish reasons. But if you don't want to be eating crickets and you would like to keep control of your money, she does a better job of educating than I could ever do. So that would be an incredible place to start. But I do have a question, just in your opinion. The 2008-2009 financial crisis that we all went through, and the mortgage-backed securities that were just a terrible, 2 sets of books, Bank of America, everywhere else. Was that the precursor, the test to what we were experiencing with BlackRock?
So it was a taking, and it was designed to keep the system going. So they weren't ready to do it. It was kind of like a mini reset. And let me give you an example. When I was Assistant Secretary of Housing, I used to get a printout for the inventory when I'd go do a field office trip. So I'd go to Dallas, and my inventory would say, you've got 10 foreclosed homes on this lot, and I'd go to the lot and it was empty. That's mortgage fraud. I found one property in Chicago that had originated a mortgage and defaulted 5 times in 1 year. So if you're interested in how this works, the Soprano TV show even had a series of 4 episodes on how HUD fraud works. And I'll never forget, I was driving down the highway and my old college roommate called me and she said, Fitz, have you seen the Soprano TV show? I said, yeah. She said, I guess what you're saying is true. I said, so I'm the former Assistant Secretary of Housing and the former lead financial advisor for HUD, but you don't believe me unless it's on the Soprano TV show. Which is why I want to tell you, turn off your TV. If you want to be free, turn off your TVs. Turn off your TVs. And so the mortgage fraud during the bailouts in the financial crisis, we had $27 trillion of bailouts. Guess how much would have paid off 100% of the single-family mortgages in the country at that time? $8 trillion. So it was more than 3 times 100% of the single-family mortgages in the country. That's a taking. Right. And, it's amazing how prosperous we are despite everything. That's how amazing America is.
We want to give another final round of applause for Catherine Austin Fitz. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us. If you do have other questions for her, she's available afterwards. Please see her books in the back. We want to thank our farmers again, Ernest Foods and Feed the Earth. Please see them before you leave. Any time donations you can give, please visit focusonamerika.us. You are ready and available. We need you. Thank you for your time. Please have a blessed rest of the day. God bless you for visiting. Oh, yes, our next meeting. Yes, please see the screen before you leave. Our next meeting, May 18th, 2024. Jerry Sheridan. This is fantastic. You need to see this. Also, Patriots Unite and Push, PUP, in August. Please sign up for that. We want you there. Incredible, just like last year.